Good afternoon. We're actually on the road today in Japan doing our weekly podcast. Today, I'm honored to have Fernando Morales-de la Cruz, who's the founder and editor-in-chief of the Lewis Hines organization, among many other things, a Guatemalan journalist. Fernando, for those who are not familiar with you, your work, your big purpose, the Lewis Hines organization, and the other things that you're doing to try to restore the social as well as the environmental balance. Tell us a bit about yourself, and particularly what is your big purpose?
Well, thank you for inviting me, Robert, to your podcast. I was born in Guatemala, a country where today, in 2025, 60% of the people live below the poverty line. And there are 1 million children working, and hundreds of thousands of these children are actually working for us here in Europe and in the developed world because they are either picking coffee, broccoli, strawberries, sugarcane, whatever. And sadly, my country is poor, but it's not the only poor country in the world. And there are, of course, other countries which are bigger than my country, like India, 1.4 billion people. And in India, there are probably 75 million children working. The challenge I decided to take some 12 years ago almost is to work for the elimination of child labor and slavery and misery, of course, in corporations, because I consider it unacceptable that there are people being exploited for profit of the top thousands of corporations in the world. And when I mean thousands, I'm focused only on the top 2,000, but of course there are many more. And I say only the top 2,000 because these top 2,000 corporations basically are about $45 trillion. And so we're talking here about the lion's share of the global GDP, if you want to call it like this. And so I am a journalist who decided to change my life because before I was working as a political consultant. I had the great privilege of working with the government of India. I did Davos, Fortune 500 CEOs for the government of India. So a great honor. I dealt with the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies, but not as a guy from Guatemala, but an Indian from Guatemala working for the Indian government. And this was a great honor. I also had the opportunity to work for Norway, which I resigned after a few months. I also worked for Brand Norway dealing with CEOs. But after a very comfortable and let's say, luxurious job as a political consultant at the highest level in the world, because that's what you do in Davos. You know, there are not only private jets and helicopters, but all kinds of perks. I decided that I would work for the people who can't afford me. And so that's what I'm doing. And these people who can't afford me are mostly children. There are 400 million children working today, not only 138 million like UNICEF and the ILO like to say. And these numbers are backed up by academics from the University of Zurich and Pennsylvania who came up with a analysis of the figures of UNICEF and the ILO. And they found, as I did before, also that the way that they collect data is not reliable. And so we have more than 300 million children not studying and nearly 400 million children working. And on top of that, we have to analyze who these children are working for. And so, in my opinion, there are at least 140 million children working for the top 2,000 corporations. And when you break this down, half of these 140 million, a bit more than 75 million children are working for the benefit, financial benefit, of 2,500 WEF participants who claim that they have been improving the state of the world since 1971. I have been to Davos during the World Economic Forum since 2007. And since then, I have almost been to every WEF. I think this is going to be my 16th WEF in January. And my job now has changed a lot because instead of working for a government and dealing with the CEOs, I'm basically tickling the predator dinosaurs, as I call them. And this is my job. My job is basically to hope that I can move the dinosaurs in the right direction. Of course, making sure that they don't step on me, but they need to move. And when I say this jokingly, I'm quite serious because basically my goal of eliminating misery and child labor and slavery in supply chains would only be achieved if we are able to change business models, because business is the only way to eliminate poverty. And of course, child labor and slavery in supply chains. So if we want to do that, then we need to change business models. And what I do mostly is deal with the largest investors in the world. I meet them personally. I talk to them. Some of them don't want to talk to me, like Norway. But that's okay. They also hear about me from journalists who called them and said, "Oh, Mr. Morales de la Cruz says that you profit from the exploitation of tens of millions of children." And then their answer was, and this is on record in Bloomberg, yes, we own shares in corporations that use minors to generate a profit. It's on the record. So it's not something that they deny. But the problem is that we live in a world today where these corporates are so powerful that governments almost don't matter, because these corporations are global and they have global influence, and they have influence not only in the little countries where they buy the products, but they have influence in the largest markets. The European Union, I am currently in Strasbourg, France, but they have influence everywhere. So when the corporations want something, they get it. And now we are witnessing in 2025 a situation where in the United States, in Europe, in Norway, the politicians have taken actions basically that will help corporations to be to continue exploiting children and workers and destroying the environment, because they will have less opportunity to be sued without civil liability. With civil liability, I mean. So what I'm working on since many years is on trying to create a global discussion about this issue. And as a journalist that has written opinion pieces in all continents, I know very well that the only one who's read a lot more than everybody else who writes is the cartoonist, because this is what happens. This happens in every newspaper, including the Washington Post, Le Monde, and the Financial Times even. So the cartoonists are journalists with a very special skill to convey a message without almost any words, or with very few words. And so I decided to call on cartoonists worldwide to come and help me defend the rights of children to education and to denounce the exploitation of children by corporates and investors. And I was quite lucky, because when I started, I only knew probably three cartoonists, two from Guatemala and one from Mexico. And to my surprise, when we had an open call in Spain for an exhibit, we received 850 cartoons. And then now we have more than 1,000 cartoonists who are part of our disorganization, Cartoons for Change. And I must express explain the word disorganization. Cartoons for Change is not an organization where we tell cartoonists what to do. They are independent journalists. We don't tell any independent journalists what to do. We just inform them of how complicated the problem is. We provide them information, and then they decide when they will actually publish something to defend the rights of children to education or oppose child labor or slavery. And this has been a very successful experience, because, every week I receive many cartoons. I don't even want to mention the number because some cartoonists get in trouble for publishing cartoons against companies, and they get in trouble with their own newspaper, not with the company, because these companies are advertisers. And so we are quite lucky that Cartoons for Change became such a movement. And what I do is try to keep these cartoonists informed by sending them updates on what's happening. For example, a couple of days ago, the European Union, the Parliament, basically got an agreement with the Council and the Commission on how they are going to water down their CSDDD, which basically is a terrible thing, because what they're doing is diluting an already bad directive on corporate sustainability due diligence. But now, when I can send all of these cartoonists the information, then they decide if they make a cartoon or not, if they consider that the issue is relevant to them. But they don't have a correspondent in Brussels or in Strasbourg to send them the information. And that's what I do. I go to the press center of the European Parliament. I meet members of parliament. I get the information and I emailed it to our colleagues, cartoonists, even though I'm not a cartoonist myself, but I act a bit like an editor-in-chief of cartoons, sending them the information and trying to discuss the details of the issues. And then regarding the Louis Hine organization, I must tell you that I have the great privilege of bringing back to life an amazing hero, Louis Hine, who was born in Kenosha, in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Sorry. And this man was a teacher and later became a sociologist. And he graduated actually from Columbia University and then became a teacher in a school in New York. And he was actually quite moved and worried about the situation of the migrants arriving in Ellis Island. And so he started taking pictures of these migrants. And as he was doing this photo project, the National Child Labor Committee, which was trying to bring about a discussion in the United States regarding the exploitation of then 2 million children in the United States, hired him, and they made him travel around the United States for many years and take pictures. And of course, he was taking pictures of children working in factories, in mines, and children working in fishing, and children working in all kinds of things. Of course, in those days, most of the children working were white, at least the ones photographed. And then we ended up having an amazing collection of photos, which is today in the Library of Congress of the United States. 5,500 of Louis Hine's photos are there. And of course, there were more. There were nearly 10,000. And I'm working on not only bringing back Louis Hine photos to the public by organizing exhibits in different cities. I've done this in the past, organizing exhibits in Basel, in front of Art Basel on the street. I've organized exhibits in Davos, on the main street of Davos. And my campaign in Davos was about gender equality in reverse reality, because I'm the father of 2 girls. So I was challenging Klaus Schwab as an individual person, me, because they didn't have enough women attending the World Economic Forum. And at first they laughed at me because my campaign was only published by a little newspaper in Davos, which is distributed free of charge in the hotels and restaurants, and by the Chinese television. That was 2012. In 2013, Bloomberg called me just before the WEF. They said, "Oh, Mr. Morales de la Cruz, we want to interview you about you defending the women in Davos." And I said, "Oh, please, no, it's not about defending the women in Davos. This is about defending half of the world's population from Davos." So, and then Catherine Hickley was the journalist who interviewed me then. After the Bloomberg story, it was huge. The Guardian, El País, EFE, and hundreds of newspapers in all continents published the story about gender equality reverse reality, because the World Economic Forum didn't have enough women. And even if Klaus Schwab had promised that at least 20% of women would be there. But it's not about the WEF as an institution only, it's about its corporate members, because in corporations, of course, then there were very few women. There were no many female CEOs. There were a few, but not enough. And also there was a hidden discrimination of women in many ways. It continues, but I think at least at the WEF level, we have improved. So now, going back to my present challenge, which is to eliminate misery in order to eliminate child labor and slavery in supply chains, what I have been doing is basically discussing with academics, as many and as famous as I can get, how we could change business models. How can we change the business model of the coffee industry? How can we change the business model of the cocoa industry? How can we change the business model of the garment and fashion industries? And to do that, of course, I travel a little bit. 90% of the time I'm traveling, and I'm meeting these academics. I'm going to Paris today in 2 hours, and then I'm going to London tonight. And basically, I was actually in Zurich yesterday. My job is to meet academics, investors, and journalists, and often politicians. But the most important thing, honestly, is to convince investors and the top management of companies that it's actually profitable for them to change business models. And I'd like to give you an example. Many people drink either coffee, tea, or cocoa in the morning. We're talking about billions of cups of coffee a day, 3 billion. And people don't realize that here in Europe, where I am, or in Japan, where you are, basically about 1 or 1.5% of the price of the consumer pays for a cup of coffee on the high street goes actually back to the coffee growers. Nothing. I mean, it's miserable. So what I've been proposing since a few years to the industry, when I meet members of the board of Nestle or Starbucks or McDonald's or any of these companies, let's change a business model and let's make this work like virtuous capitalism, where we have the consumer pay 10 cents additionally per cup, which for the European or Japanese or North American consumer is nothing. And then with those 10 cents, we can multiply 2.5 times the farm gate price today paid to the coffee growers. This would actually change the reality in my own Guatemala, where my family comes from, which is the mountains where they produce coffee, and where often less than 5% of all girls graduate from secondary school. And they call this fair trade coffee. And so I am doing the same with the garment and fashion industry. I even meet unions and, of course, designers and shareholders in fashion companies. And, of course, the largest ones, the largest shareholders of the largest fashion companies. And I'm trying to convince them also that we change the business model of all garments. Because if you look at Mohammed Yunus, Bangladesh. I say that because he's from Bangladesh, but also he's leading now. The reality is so terrible there that if we added €1 on a pair of blue jeans, we would multiply times 4 or 5 the wages of these women, because they're mostly women, working in the complete supply chain of a garment. And when I mean a complete supply chain, I'm also going to the raw materials like cotton or silk or whatever raw materials there are in making a garment. So when we talk about virtuous capitalism and a new, really transparent share value model, we're talking about bringing back to the true origin of all involved in the production of a garment, €1 that is shared, and it multiplies the income of these people. Of course, I'm not asking companies to lose money. I'm asking companies to think that they're actually going to make more money, because as I've told a former CEO of Nestle, can you imagine if all of those tens of millions of people who are exploited in your supply chain today became your customers? And if they could buy milk and cookies for their children for breakfast and cereal, can you imagine what volume of business you are losing because you are actually only extracting from these coffee, cocoa regions, sugar regions, palm oil, whatever, but you are not thinking of them as your partners and potential customers, where you're actually paying them for their product and they are paying you for your products. Imagine a country like India, where I had the privilege of working, and I've been to India probably 2 dozen times in 1 year. You have a situation where people are so poor collecting tea leaves. But when you sit in London, where I'm actually going to be tonight, and I have tea, people are not thinking that they're not even sending 1 penny back. Not one. It's not 2 pence or three. No, it's not even 1 penny per tea bag. Of course, this is a neo-colonial business model. Of course, an inheritance of the colonial business model. And these companies are huge. They're not only British company or German companies. Of course, there are Indian companies like Tata and others. And the problem we have, Robert, is that we are not really working to change the business models. So I even told this to Ban Ki-moon, whom I met in Davos once, and I told him, look, I really like the idea of the Sustainable Development Goals, but I don't see anybody discussing the business models. So you in the United Nations can actually have zero child labor, zero slavery, zero hunger, and zero poverty, even in the supply chain of the cafeteria of the UN. So we have a very serious problem, Robert, because there is a lot of whitewashing, greenwashing, and there's very little being done to solve the problems of the people, even though, for example, Davos claims to be improving the state of the world, and they actually could, because if you look at the 2,500 or maybe 3,000 participants that there will be in Davos now in January 2026, the level of people you have there includes many Nobel Prize of Economics, includes the top academics, includes, of course, major investors, and now the WEF is co-presided by Larry Fink and Andre Hoffman, both very serious business people. Andre has been a very strong advocate of the Sustainable Development Goals, but Larry Fink is the opposite, honestly. He manages 11 trillion, not he only, but the company that he leads, BlackRock.
Yeah.
And the challenge is really how to decide to improve the state of the world at the level of Davos by changing business models. Let's stop whitewashing, greenwashing. Let's be serious men and women, and let's understand that we don't have any right to have slaves or exploit children, and our obligation is actually to fix it. Yes, and that's what we have to do in our position of privilege.
You're taking on, first of all, congratulations on taking on a very tough challenge. I remember well, last year, before I forgot, I was posting my normal social rant, and somebody got very angry from the financial sector, and he called me an SJW. I said, oh, I don't know what that is. So I had to look it up. And SJW stood for social justice warrior. And I said, oh, great. I'm going to put that in my heading on LinkedIn. I see that as a compliment. So thank you for that. And thank you also for taking on this challenge. And, I've never gone to WEF. Actually, years ago, I was told you should reach out to Klaus Schwab about sustainable investing. That would be a good topic. But what happened is, I think 10 minutes after I sent him an email about adding that to the program, he immediately responded very angry, take me off your mailing list, because the WEF is just a money-making club where everyone can feel happy about not doing anything and make selfies and speak to CNBC and everyone else, but it doesn't really accomplish anything. And all of the reports they produce are just sponsored reports with no critical thought. I don't really believe that that's going to change. I admire the fact that you've taken this route of using cartoons to highlight the abuses of business. I did wanted to ask you one thing. My wife is an anthropologist, and she asked me, well, what is the definition of child labor if a father serving tea goes with his son serving tea in India or Nepal, and the child is quite young? Is that child labor, or are we talking about forced labor? What is your definition of child labor?
Well, first of all, I don't make any definitions. These are legal definitions country by country. There are laws. And of course, in some countries, children can work when they are 14 and more. In others, only when they are 16 and more. And in others, only when they are not children, meaning 18 and more. And of course, country by country, there are legal definitions. But to make it simple, I am focused on those children that work and don't study, because I believe it's absolutely terrible that we deny children the right to education and profit from them. By profiting from them, we are not only destroying their future, which we have no right to, but we are actually destroying our own societies. Because if some of the people in the society don't have access to education, you end up with a country like mine, Guatemala, which is a failed state, or like India, or worse than that, you end up with people seeking justice in their own hands, and then you have no peace. So the challenge is to build equitable societies by creating opportunities through business, but being quite serious about this. This is not about stakeholder capitalism, as Dr. Schwab has said many times. And of course, most of the people who go to Davos didn't even read the manifesto before the WEF. But it's about changing business models. And companies, all in the large companies and even all in our homes, have child labor. Because I drink coffee, I just drank coffee. I cannot guarantee that the coffee I buy has no child labor. Soon I will be able to, because I'm setting up a Cafe for Change, which is a social enterprise that will actually work with this 10 cents per cup, sending the 10 cents to the coffee origin, which is 12 per kilo. So you know. But the challenge is that the corporations, all of them, have child labor. Of course, some have only 5,000 children in their supply chains. Others have only 100,000, and others have 500,000 or even more than a million. And I estimate that Nestle is one of those that has more than a million children, probably some 3 million children working in its supply chains. But it's not the only one. There are companies in India that do the same, and in China. So the challenge is, how do we fix this by discussing at the top level of the corporations new business models? This is not a sustainability discussion. This is a top business model decision in which the top management, meaning CEO, CFO, and of course CMO and everybody else, have to really present to shareholders something that makes sense. And the shareholders need to understand that in the long term, but I'm not talking about 20 years, I'm talking in the long term, a year and a half or two, which is really short term, because they're thinking only in quarters, next quarterly report. They will have a true change in their company. And in the medium term, 3-4 years, they will actually be able to show more profits by changing the business models. Of course, it would be easier if these decisions were taken at the World Economic Forum, or if these decisions were taken by investors like Norway. I would like to talk a bit more about Norway soon, but I'm just trying. I just go to different meetings. I found a few CEOs. There are basically 1,000 CEOs in Davos, more or less. Might be 1,025 or something like this. But these 1,000 CEOs, I can say that maybe 25 are already seriously asking me, how do we do this in my industry? Let's talk about my company. Show me the numbers. Show me how my company can actually change the business model with the support of the consumers, and don't lose business, but on the other hand, solve our problems in the supply chains. There are many CEOs who say, yes, we do have a problem and we would like to fix it, but show me how. And this is not only about me. That's why I'm talking about the academics and others that I talk to. And I'm trying to bring these academics together with the CEOs and the senior members of the management, of course, board members too, and trying to say, okay, if you decided to have a non-competitive agreement with your with your people in your industry, fashion, then you will end up with the European Commission going after you for a cartel that is trying to increase prices.
Yeah. Right.
No, you would end up with a discussion with the European Commission saying, look, we want to eliminate misery and child labor in our supply chains, and the only way to do it is that we have a non-competitive initiative here where we all are going to create a new business model, and the consumers will have to pay €1 more. Under European law, in every country of the 27, it would be impossible for them to be stopped for the competition commissioner. It would be impossible, because what they're doing is actually good. But I'm not talking about only the fast fashion, H&M, C&A, Inditex, whatever. I'm talking about all industry. There's slavery and child labor in Louis Vuitton, in Hermes,
Of
and
course.
in Gucci, in Dior. And so we need to really start looking at where our clothes come from, but also we need to start thinking that we need to go to the top, meaning Davos and all of the members, and we need to go to the top investors, meaning Norway, and of course other ethical investors like the churches. That's why I'm fighting with the Church of England, and that's why I'm fighting with many archbishops and bishops, because they, as an investors, are not ethical either. The churches, for example, here our neighbors from Germany, I'm in Strasbourg, which is just one river away from Germany. They have a church tax, and some of the bishops and archbishops manage 5, 6, 8, and 10 billion euro in investments, but nobody knows where those investments are. Well, I have gone through the trouble of trying to dig out where their money is invested and what kind of multi-stakeholder partnerships their NGOs of the churches have. And surprise, surprise, they are involved also in child labor and slavery because they are involved in fair trade coffee, in fair trade cocoa. They have stores that sell this stuff. Caritas or the Church of England is involved also in deceiving its own members by telling them that the tea is fair trade or the cocoa is fair trade. And actually, fair trade is a scam. So most importantly, I am really focused on the investors because I think major investors who have 100, 500, and 1 billion in a company can come together and start
Mhm.
a really
I,
serious dialogue in the company so they can actually eliminate misery, child labor, and slavery. And last, it's important that I point out that in the case of some investors like Norway, this is not an optional issue because Norway is not BlackRock. BlackRock is a private company or a publicly held company, but in this case, it's a company. But Norges Bank is a state, is the state of Norway. So the
correct.
state of Norway has a constitution, and the constitution of Norway has in among its articles the protection of human rights and children's rights. And here we have a state, the state of Norway, violating not only its own constitution by owning shares in hundreds of corporations that profit from slavery and child labor and financing its own budget. Yes, 25% of the budget of the government of Norway comes from the pension fund. It's not really a pension fund, but that's how they call it. And they have also state obligations to protect, defend, fulfill human rights and children's rights, and Norway is also violating that. So I invite you and your audience to read my complaints to the Prime Minister of Norway and my articles about Norway, which are really a very serious challenge because everybody thinks of Norway as a snow white country that is a major example in human rights and children's rights. Well, no, I'm very sorry, but only in 25
Thinking,
years,
yeah.
Norway, no, actually a bit more. In 30 years, Norway has been profiting from the exploitation of tens of millions of children. This is absolutely unacceptable. We have to fix this, and they
Agreed.
have to fix this, not by because Fernando Morales-de la Cruz is accusing them. They have to fix it because it's inhumane and illegal.
Mhm.
Illegal under Norwegian law and illegal under international law. I just met the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights for the second time recently. I was in Geneva uh, at an event just to try to meet him. And I basically told him, look, we really have to fix this. You want to talk about business and human rights, but we have to go after Norway. I don't care if Norway finances your institution or all of the UN system. But again, here we have a problem because Norway is also financing NGOs and
Of course.
investigative journalists.
That's
Yeah,
why they finance them to keep them quiet.
I know. I used to work for them. I quit.
Yeah,
I
you
was
did.
on it.
The it's it's well, I think it was last month there was an outrageous press release that came out that Norway was abandoning temporarily its code of conduct because it didn't want to divest from tech companies that were doing business in Israel because of the war in Gaza. So the ethical guidelines are only valid when it doesn't cost them any money. So they're basically drug dealers. They're selling their heroin is oil and gas, and they profit and they invest money, and they have lots of press releases about that. But fundamentally, they will never really embrace this if it's going to cost them money. And
Well,
I've dealt quite a lot with them. They came to our conferences, but it was always a kind of a flirtatious event. There was no, we would make out on the couch, but we would never have sex. So, uh,
well, I
but
am in a different situation. I am just trying to tickle the dinosaurs, and I think Nikolai Tangen and Karin Smith, who is the chief investment
yeah,
officer
yeah,
there,
I
basically
know them.
in charge of ethical investment. They both know very well what my opinion is, but most importantly, you were talking about this announcement of the state of Norway, and honestly, no government can pose a constitution. That's called a coup. So when you actually have a constitution and you decide that from now on there will be no guarantees, meaning yes, the people exploited will have no rights, and we suspend and put this on hold. So our constitutional obligation to defend human rights and children's rights, and also our state obligation internationally, is on hold. It's not possible. So the government of Norway or the Parliament of Norway, because it's a parliamentary monarchy there, cannot do this. They have no legal right. So what they have done is illegal also under Norwegian and
But
international law.
you're
And I
you're
say
right.
international law because they're actually pausing the respect for the human rights and the children's rights of people around the world, which are actually linked to the investments of Norway. So it's not a normal investor. And hopefully, a few members of parliament who are actually very interested in my position and actually share it now are going to have the courage to raise this issue, because in Norway it's known as Barnegate, because Barnegate means children gate. And it's about the biggest scandal of Norway, where Norway has been investing in corporations profiting from tens of millions of children exploited. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's not only that. I mean, they also have been very active in supposedly supporting nature-based solutions and climate through Red Plus and that, but they've never actually generated much credit for it because they just want to control the dialogue. It's not about actually moving the needle forward. It was always called the Petroleum Fund, and they never liked that, so they changed the sovereign fund or the government pension fund of Norway. It's not a pension fund because they never pay out. They pay 4% on assets to the government, but they never pay out to anyone there. So good that you're doing that. I would also pursue maybe a legal approach, not just an embarrassing approach, because they're quite powerful, so they can control a lot of the communications going out there because they're a big investor. So, but good that you're doing that. But wouldn't it be easier instead of going after the companies, ag, food, clothing, only to focus on the 25 largest asset owner slash managers like the Norwegian Petroleum, the government fund of Norway, or the Japanese pension funds, or CalSTRS, CalPERS, those, or maybe not BlackRock, maybe State Street, one of the others, Vanguard, those individual or the European ones like AXA, Allianz, wouldn't that be easier because the concentration of wealth is in fewer hands? You don't have to deal with so many CEOs.
Well, I can tell you humbly that at least they know I exist, but it's not so easy to move them. And
No, of course not. We've been doing this for
every time
25
I run
years.
into one of them at a party or at the World Economic Forum, I have a chat with their CEOs. But, you know, I think that we have the problem that few are as systemic as Norway, because Norway is involved as a shareholder in 9,000
Yeah,
corporations.
that's true.
And as a shareholder in 9,000 corporations, they vote in those AGMs.
Hmm.
Okay. But most importantly, Norway has the legal obligation to protect, defend, and fulfill human rights and children's rights. And it also has the international state obligation not to profit from slavery or child labor in this case. So this is another issue because Norway is systemic. So I will not abandon my fight with Norway because I consider it crucial. Of course, they have another option. They can also change the constitution.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
they can also say, we don't respect human rights and we don't respect children's rights and we don't care about our
well,
international state obligations. And we are going to denounce all ILO conventions and the Convention on Rights of the Child and done, done, done. They won't do
well,
that.
yeah, well, the
But
government did put a pause on the ethical guidelines because it was going to cost them money by divesting from the seven tech companies of the U.S. who had big business ties with Israel. So they will do it when it costs them money. So that's why they didn't divest, even though they were supposed to, because those companies didn't meet the ethical guidelines because of the war in Gaza. So they just paused the guidelines, at which they might do the same thing for you.
well, this is not about me, but I would
No,
just
no,
want to
no.
tell you,
Yeah,
people in Norway told me, wow, Fernando, they are so scared that now they post ethical guidelines and they use the big tech as excuse.
yeah,
Yes, it's the big tech as excuse because although big tech is considered only big tech, every one of the big tech has child labor and human rights violations. Just recently, Norway actually announced that they were going to vote against the management of Microsoft on human rights. It's a little step forward. I don't take them so seriously because they did that because they didn't think that the resolution was going to have any impact. But they didn't do that really in Tesla. They didn't do that in Apple.
yeah.
Of course, I'm talking only about the big tech now. Okay. So if we talk about the big corporations where uh, Norway is a shareholder, I'm talking about Apple, for example, and Microsoft and Google. We're talking about trillions in market capitalization, so they are the largest ones of them all. But in all of them, of course, there's a serious problem with child labor and slavery. And the issue here is that it's not only those, but many, hundreds of them. And the challenge is to make sure that Norway doesn't divest, but takes an active role in demanding the corporation governance, because this is what every investor should be asking for governance.
Well,
And
they
yeah,
pretend to do that through engagement, which has failed for the last 20 years. Engagement is the
you mean having coffee with child labor with them?
yeah, exactly. Go sit on the couch and say, these are doing better. We came up with a much effective solution called second generation engagement, which meant that instead of investing in the best of class and trying to talk to them about changing their behavior, we suggested you should invest in the worst of class. The companies, the listed companies, small and mid cap that have terrible reputation, and you use an activist hedge fund approach, you get a larger share of the shares available, and instead of putting a gun to their head, increase the share price, it will kill you. Say, get rid of the child labor, integrate sustainability in the whole supply chain, or we'll kill you. And if you do that with the worst of class, you will increase the share price faster than you will do with the best of class. So that engagement model hasn't really increased share price. Even some of the other pension funds that realize, well, it's nice to say we're talking to them, we're engaging, we're having coffee. Fernando's quiet now, but it doesn't really,
Fernando won't be quiet
it generates
unless.
fees for the service providers, but it doesn't improve the company theoretically.
Okay, Fernando won't be quiet, I must say, because I decided some 12 years ago, almost in February, will be 12 years, to do this as my life mission. So I won't be
Good.
quiet. They have actually offered me um, a lot of money if I want to set up a foundation that only
Oh,
barks
of
but
course, of
doesn't
course.
bite. But I wouldn't even say who did that. It's useless.
We
So
will.
going back to the working class, I want to mention that they already are shareholders in the working class.
Yeah.
Okay, they are a shareholder in every working class that is public. They cannot be a shareholder in Mars because it's a privately held company, or Cargill because it's a privately held company, or Ferrero because it's privately held. But they are a shareholder in other companies like Barry Callebaut in chocolate, they on cocoa. They control 28% of the whole industrial cocoa market,
Or
Barry Callebaut.
Unilever.
And they, of course, have hundreds of thousands of children working for them. And they're also a shareholder in Nestle, again, and Inditex, and I can continue. So Norway is a shareholder in the working class by child labor and slavery. The challenge Robert, as you said well, is that they understand they were actually to clean up this company, their share price would go up. But you see companies like Danone, which is now a B Corp, and it's one of the worst plastic polluters. They are so proud that they are a B Corp. And of course, the CEO comes from Barry Callebaut, where he led a company that had hundreds of thousands of children being exploited in cocoa. And now Danone also has child labor, not only in the supply chains, but also in its recycling. Because if you go to the India or Mexico or Nigeria, Ghana, whatever, you will find that there are a lot of children actually collecting plastic in these dumps. And these children are actually working in the supply chains of these big corporations that now are claiming that they are ethical because they are selling us recycled plastics. But these recycled plastics are actually only possible thanks to millions of children, which are actually doing this for Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Danone, Nestle, Unilever, Mars. I can continue with the list of worst exploiters in worst polluters, sorry, in plastic. And so what I believe, Robert, is that even if the political movement is against what I'm trying to do now, because we've reached a point where Europe, Norway, the United States are actually taking political action to basically legalize slavery and child labor almost. I believe there's optimism, reason for optimism, because the main levers are still there. And they are not BlackRock, and unfortunately not Vanguard or JP Morgan yet. I don't know, maybe Jamie Dimon, he's not my friend, but I've seen him a couple of times, would change his mind. But some of these people are going to be very concerned about just having zero governance, because that's what we are arriving to. We are coming to a point of the law of the jungle in capitalism, and this is not capitalism anymore. This is a system where plutocracies, which is what we are witnessing now under construction everywhere in Europe, in the United States, and in other countries, are actually taking over. Of course, we have Switzerland, the perfect plutocracy, where only the middle class pays taxes and the rich don't. But not every country has to be like Switzerland. And most importantly, no country should be like Switzerland, neutral to slavery, neutral to exploitation, and have a system which some economists have called exploitation, which basically profits from the weak of the world and creates a really serious system of child labor around the world for the corporations which are in Switzerland, whether the corporation is called Starbucks, which is based in Lausanne too, or Nestle, which is based in Vevey, or the mining companies, or any other of the companies which are based in Switzerland. And then I would just like to go back to one thing. I admire very much the discussion that you are involved in about ethical investments, but we need to be very serious about this. If it's illegal, it cannot be ethical. Very simple. If it's illegal, it's illegal. And I'm not so worried about the ethical part. I'm worried about the illegal part, because I don't believe in morals in investment, but I believe in laws. So do we have the right to have hundreds of thousands of children in the supply chain of our XYZ company? No, it's illegal. Let's stop. So I don't want to hear about moral money. I'm not talking only about the Financial Times. I just want to hear about governance, rule of law. Can we actually go back to a system where rule of law is actually the main guardian of democracies? Because this is what's happening. We don't have democracies anymore, and we are going to these plutocracies where the big tech and some major investors do whatever they want, and all of these poor people go hungry. And I want to point out one very important fact. The Sustainable Development Goals have failed because there was never a business model to achieve them.
That's true.
Yeah.
With a ribbon cutting ceremony. You brought up or brought up B Corp. About a year and a half ago, we launched something called the Better World Prize, which was basically a People's Choice Award, and we invited all of the ESG and impact investing frameworks and measurement systems to present their methodology. And we had 44 independent organizations showing how they analyze sustainable performance of companies. All of the well-funded ones, like B Corp, like PRI, Principal Responsible Investing, like the Carbon Disclosure Project, like EcoVadis, like S&P, MSCI, GRI, all refused to participate because they didn't want comparability. And we actually had a shout out with B Corp that you raised 20 million or $30 million as a nonprofit, but you never published where that money went. And the CEO told him, "Oh, don't worry, I can send you the IRS form." I said, "No, you should publish it on your website." So I was never really a fan of most of that. And I remember they asked my wife, who did a social enterprise with Bhutan, and she screaming at them, "Your model is terrible because you don't look at how well you engage with the community." Um, so, but what you're trying to do is basically what there was an attempt to put in what like a water pricing line item, which was done by some various individuals like Albert Appleton. The idea of putting a line item to preserve nature. So what you're trying to do is putting a line item to help educate and stop child labor. Maybe that's an idea that everyone who buys anything will see that, and that will also increase it. It's a simple thing. It's not a big deal. You know, I know that Amazon did it until Trump started yelling at them about what the cost of the tariff was going to be on, that. But maybe putting a line item about the money going to stop child labor and or abuse in forced labor. Maybe that's an idea. I remember we were discussing that when about this was I think in Central America. They said we have to keep the ranchers from not grazing near the watershed because the cows go there. So they put a line item in the water bill, which might be an idea for you. Going forward, how can we help you?
Well, you can actually support me by making a donation through our um, PayPal account for the Louis Hine organization. This is the most important thing we need. We are setting up this foundation in the Netherlands, and there will be a
When will it be
501c3.
ready? When will it be?
Well, fiscally, I think it should be approved by February because we
Okay.
need the last registration. But we are already collecting funds because we need to
Okay.
raise funds to continue moving, and most importantly, to hire photographers. We will have about 30 photographers by May 2026, documenting child labor in 30 different locations.
Good.
Some of them will do 2 tours, meaning 2 4-week tours, and they will be, of course, sending us the photos. And these photos are going to be for free use for any media worldwide. That's the business model. These photographers are all well known. They have been published by major media and by major photo agencies. And so the most important way to support our efforts is to donate, to help us move forward, to help us continue challenging the investors, but most importantly, to help us continue discussing new business models who can actually change this. Because in the end, a lot of people want to give a Christmas donation for charity, which I think is nice, but you don't solve the problem with this kind of charity. What we need is to create business models that will not sustain misery, but actually help eradicate misery, child labor, and forced labor. And regarding the one line that you mentioned, I'll send you the packaging of Cafe for Change, which actually says we share 10 cents per cup. And I hope that Starbucks one day, McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, and all the big ones, Prey and whatever, join us by saying we also share 10 cents per cup. And it would be wonderful if some of them say, no, we share 15 cents per cup or 20. Because the only way to solve the problem of the world at large is to actually understand that we need to share these profits, but not by having less profits, but by creating more profits. And I am very serious about this because in Davos, when I talk to some business leaders, they're like, wow, I thought you were a communist. And I said, no.
No.
But yeah, you're proposing new business models. Yes, of course, because communism doesn't work and development aid is fraud. So I just come here to tell you that we need to change business models, and I want you to put me with your CFO and with your chief legal officer too. Because in some cases, this is so terrible, Robert. Many industries have
Nope.
business models which are according to humanity. They have increased misery, hunger, malnutrition, and child labor. And when you talk about bringing Norway to court, I was just recently in The Hague, and this is no secret because the Norwegians saw me there. I think uh, we need to bring them to The Hague to have a discussion about how a state has actually made it a business model to profit from slavery and child labor and just look very white. It's not white, sorry. Even if they have lots of snow, what they're doing by sustaining misery, child labor, and profiting from it is absolutely cruel. And I think it's time that they are taken to court. Yes, the state of Norway.
Maybe
And
it's maybe it's something that you should discuss also with maybe a litigation fund who would love to go after one of the biggest sovereign funds in the world.
yes,
Uh,
but I just want to point out that crimes against humanity are committed by individuals. And this is a bit like the Nuremberg trial. We cannot judge the Nazi regime. We are going to judge the leaders of the Nazi regime as they did.
okay.
So, in the case of Norway, we are talking about the prime minister, the minister of finance, the governor of the Central Bank of Norway, the
Okay.
CEO of the
Good.
Norwegian Pension Fund, which is Government Pension Fund Global, as they call it. And these are the people who are responsible for this cruel and illegal business model that must be stopped. Yes.
Fernando, I thought I was taking on a difficult thing trying to change the financial system so it worked for all stakeholders with the work we've been doing at TBLI, but it seemed that you took on a much bigger challenge, but you have still a lot of energy to move this forward. Send me the link information about people making donations, and I'll push that out into the posting. Congratulations on what you're doing. I'll send you some content that might be helpful. Is there anything that we didn't cover or mention that you feel, oh yeah, we should have just talked about that or forgot to mention that?
Well, there are so many issues in this, but I think because we have the World Economic Forum happening in January 19, what's important is that we challenge the WEF as an institution because they have been claiming that they're improving the state of the world and they actually
Oh yeah.
haven't. And but I insist on this, but I want to tell you something more that we challenge the media that covers the World Economic Forum because my colleague journalists who are going there, they are becoming more like PR
Yeah.
people than journalists. And so when you're sitting in front of Nicolai Tangen or the Prime Minister of Norway or Larry Fink, I think it's time to ask the hard questions. And the hard question is when will you stop profiting from the exploitation of children and slavery? And this is a very serious question.
Yeah.
And
But
yeah, most importantly, how many children work for Nestle? Half a
uh,
million, 1 million, 2 million, three? Yeah. So these questions have to be answered because if we don't come to this discussion of knowing how big the problem is, we're never going to fix it.
it's very difficult, particularly in 2025, 26, to get to media to ask the challenging questions because they all want to eat from the same pig trough they've been
Yes.
eating, and they live on the sponsorship. Most of them don't make money, which is why the billionaires are buying up these media companies because they're relatively cheap. Bloomberg is not even a media company, it's just to sell terminals, and that's why their news service can lose money because it's for selling terminals. So it's always going to be difficult with the mainstream media to get them to confront people that they want to invite again for, the what market makers, and say to them, Fernando, your children are actually quite ugly, which is what you're asking them to say. I hope it changes. I don't see that changing much with the mainstream media because of the model that they have and that they have to have access So they want to hang out on the private jets with Richard Branson and all that, but never ask a difficult question. Dude, your main business is CO2 emissions. Um, so I hope that I'm found wrong, but I admire what you're doing and also taking the business model approach grounded in governance and legality instead of feel good. Because I just wrote the article, which is what actually how we met about the impact mafia. And I never got anything that went viral before on LinkedIn. So evidently there a lot of people feel the same. I think you're on the right path and I admire your determination to do that. And if anything we can do to help you, we will.
Thank you, Robert. I don't like admiration because it actually could hurt me, but your offer to help is accepted.
Okay.
I need all the help I can get, and the children I'm defending, I need all the support of every one of us
Sure.
who has the privilege of living the life we lead.
I'm going to stop this. Okay.